Hey guys, tonight we're heading into a dimly lit, slightly moldy apothecary tucked behind a crumbling chapel wall. Candles flicker against the soot-stained stone, and the smell, is an unholy marriage of dried herbs, ancient wood, and something that might be cat urine. But we won't linger. You're standing here because your back molar feels like it's sprouting a demon. And in a world where there are no antibiotics, no Tylenol, and no helpful pamphlets on dental hygiene, your best hope lies in a sticky brown substance scraped from the side of a ceramic jar. It's poppy juice, also called laudanum by the learned, or God's naptime glue by those who've tasted it. A tiny monk, bald and blinking behind a cowl, raises a vial to the light. For the pain, he whispers, like he's offering forbidden fruit. And, well, he is, because opium from the poppy wasn't just a rare treasure. It was both a mercy and a moral test. See, you weren't supposed to avoid suffering. Pain, in medieval Christian thought, was often seen as purifying. That to think, it might mean your soul is being scoured clean. But if your screams start to echo through the cloister, and the abbot fears the whole monastery will lose sleep, you just might get the monk's mercy. So you sip. It tastes like bitter rot and licorice. You think of death and sleep and something in between. Laudanum didn't always work. It was unpredictable, sometimes useless, sometimes fatal. But right now, it's the only thing standing between you and a metal hook wielded by someone who once specialized in gutting pigs. The poppy had been known since antiquity, passed down from the Greeks in the era of medical texts, then filtered into monastic traditions. Monks, surprisingly, were some of the best early pharmacists. They cultivated herb gardens, wrote manuscripts on medicinal recipes, and experimented with dosages, which is adorable until you realize that experimenting with dosage usually meant, oops, Brother Thomas isn't breathing anymore. You lie back on a low wooden bench. The apothecary's assistant, he might be 12 years old, ties a linen strap around your forehead. Your arms are pinned. You're not here for surgery yet. First, they want to see if the dose took. It didn't. So they pour a second sip of the syrupy potion, followed by a muttered prayer. You begin to float a little. Not enough to forget the pain entirely, but enough to slow your fear. The monk pulls out a rudimentary pair of forceps, 2 rods that vaguely resemble salad tongs. He mutters something about St. Apollonia, the patron saint of teeth, whose martyrdom involved getting her jaw shattered. Inspiring. Here comes your first fun fact. Ancient poppy usage wasn't strictly ecclesiastical. Folk healers and wandering wise women often made their own concoctions from dried pods, infusing them with wine, honey, or even vinegar to amplify the effect. Sometimes they'd toss in bits of willow bark, which contained salicin, an early aspirin precursor, a delightful cocktail for knocking out farmhands with infected molars. But not everyone agreed on the safety of this numbing nectar. Historians still argue whether the church widely endorsed or merely tolerated the use of opiates. On one hand, they preserved the recipes. On the other, too much pain relief might be considered spiritually suspicious. Was it healing or heresy? Outside, a bell tolls. Someone has died. You, possibly. But back in your corner, you're still breathing. Barely. The monk sighs. We'll try again tomorrow, he says, his tone somewhere between pity and impatience. You're unstrapped and handed a cloth, wet and herbal scented, to bite on for the night. The pain has returned, but now it's wrapped in a dull fog, like it's echoing through layers of linen. Later, you'll learn that some tooth pullers steeped rags in poppy juice, then held them inside patients' cheeks before extraction. Others boiled the plant down with vinegar and rubbed the thick resin onto the gums. If you're lucky, that's what tomorrow brings. If not, they'll skip straight to the hook and prayer combo. Oh, and here's your quirky tidbit. In some remote areas, villagers believed that poppies had to be harvested while singing a specific song, or the spirits of pain would follow the juice into the bottle. Not a superstition you want to mess with when your head feels like it's exploding from the inside. The apothecary's candles burn lower. The monk scribbles something in a vellum ledger with a quill. Probably, patient didn't die. Yet, your gums throb, your head swims, and your stomach clenches with that awful mix of hunger and fear. You wonder what's worse, the cure or the curse. Somewhere outside, a donkey brays into the night, like it too has a toothache. You lie back down, biting the rag gently, hoping tomorrow's dose of laudanum hits just a little harder. Or maybe, just maybe, the pain will vanish on its own. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The morning comes far too soon, and with it, the return of that maddening, pulsing ache in your jaw. You've slept poorly, if at all, on a straw-stuffed mattress that smells like mildew and goat. Somewhere in the night, your makeshift linen rag fell to floor, now damp with saliva and dust. You sit up, tongue swollen and cheek tender, wondering how medieval people weren't just constantly screaming in pain. Spoiler, some of them were. You're led, staggered really, into the next chamber of the apothecary. This room has a different smell. Burnt metal, hot wax, and cloves. Yes, cloves. Before they were the festive spice in your aunt's questionable fruitcake. They were the dental anesthetic of choice in Europe. Well, anesthetic might be a bit generous. Let's say distraction with a scent of fire. Standing at a small workbench is a man with soot on his apron and a hammer dangling from his belt. You briefly wonder if you've entered the wrong room, until you see what he's holding. A molar. Someone else's, hopefully. It's clamped in a crude, rusty pair of pliers. Behind him, an array of metal tools, one of which is suspiciously curved and hooked like something used to extract demons or flip pancakes. Meet the toothless. In medieval Europe, barbers weren't just your go-to for a trim. They were your go-to for everything. Need a shave? A bloodletting? A wart lanced? A tooth yanked? Same guy, same chair, slightly different screaming. These jack-of-all-trades were considered practical rather than learned. Unlike university-trained physicians, they actually did things that bled. This fellow before you, grizzled and heavy-set, was probably a blacksmith once. Many tooth pullers were. Why? Because metalworking meant you had the tools and the grip to rip a molar clean out of someone's skull. That's the resume. He beckons you over. You glance at the chair, if you can call it that, three-legged, unstable, and stained with what might be wine or might be blood. Or both. The floor beneath it is straw, easy to clean. You sit. The stool wobbles. No poppy juice this time. Just clove oil, made by crushing dried clove buds with mortar and pestle and mixing them with warm ale or rendered fat. The oil contains eugenol, which modern science confirms does have numbing properties. You lean back and let the toothsmith smear the paste along your gums using a thin stick. The taste is strong, spicy, bitter, almost medicinal. You feel a slight cooling sensation. Or maybe it's just your terror evaporating through your pores. He grunts approval. Give it a bit, he says, voice like gravel. You're not sure if a bit means seconds or minutes, but you sit still until the hammer appears. It's not for hitting you. Probably, instead, he uses the weight of it to gently tap the base of the forceps he's fitted around your tooth. Loosens it, he mutters. You begin to sweat. Now here's your historical nugget. Clove oil was traded from the Spice Islands, brought westward through complex and dangerous trade routes. Its arrival in Europe was a bit like bringing Wi-Fi to a medieval village. Pricey, exotic, and not always available. Which meant that if you were poor, your version of clove might be a stale loaf of bread soaked in wine and hope. But if you lived near a port town, or were lucky enough to know someone who knew someone, you just might get the real deal. Still, there's debate. Historians still argue whether clove oil was widely used in the early medieval period, or if it only became commonplace toward the high and late Middle Ages. Some argue that its usage was limited to elite households and wealthy abbeys. Others point to scattered texts and herbals that suggest village healers had their own crude version, using whatever botanicals they could pass off as clove-like. Think dried garlic skins, wild thyme, or that one stubborn root that smells vaguely of cinnamon and feet. Back in the workshop, the toothless moves in. He grips the forceps tighter. There's no countdown, no warning, no emotional support owl hooting comfortingly from the rafters. Just a grunt, and then a sickening crunch. Well, at least he's trying to numb you. That's more than some could say. Fun fact, some medieval dentists didn't bother with cloves or poppies. They simply distracted patients with prayer, pain elsewhere, like pinching the thigh or slapping the forehead. Or, if things were particularly grim, alcohol. Lots and lots of alcohol. Ale, wine, mead, whatever got you woozy enough not to notice the steel approaching your mouth like a guillotine in miniature. But today, you got cloves. And as the toothsmith yanks and the nerves scream, you realize that maybe it helped. A little. Maybe. Or maybe you're just going into shock. When it's over, he drops the bloody tooth into a wooden bowl, wipes his hands on his apron, and says, "You'll want boiled wine for the swelling." He gestures toward a battered cup on the side table. It tastes foul, but it's warm and numbs your throat on the way down. And here's your quirky tidbit before we wrap. Some tooth pullers believe that if you rub cloves on the opposite side of your mouth, it would trick the pain into migrating away from a bad tooth. Pain is a wandering spirit, easily misled. Sounds ridiculous now, but after that extraction, you might just try it. You're sent home with a little cloth satchel containing more crushed cloves, some thread, in case your gum starts to split, and a firm warning not to bite anything harder than porridge. At least for a week. Preferably 2. You shuffle into the cold morning light, jaw sore, tooth gone, breath smelling like a holiday roast gone wrong. And strangely thankful, because in this world, cloves beat cold steel and screams. You don't plan to go outside that day. Your face feels like it's been punched by a horse and then judged by God. But the old woman next door insists. "Cold air cures 2 spirits," she mutters while wrapping a threadbare shawl around your shoulders. And before you can object, you're being ushered outside into a wind that slaps your cheeks like it's personally offended by your dental hygiene. It's winter in your little medieval village. Snow crusts the rooftops, and icicles dangle like nature's teeth, sharp, cold, unforgiving. Your boots crunch on the frozen ground as you trudge to the edge of the town square, breath puffing visibly into the brittle air. The wind howls like a banshee with a bone to pick, and your jaw, for a few blessed moments, numbs. And there it is, the logic. No clothes, no herbs, no prayers. Just weather. Unfiltered, uncaring, and extremely effective. Welcome to Cold Therapy Medieval Edition. Believe it or not, some healers truly did recommend exposing yourself to the elements as a numbing method. In the absence of herbs or concoctions, nature was the great fallback. Got a festering molar? Go outside. Wait until your face goes so cold you forget your own name. Then quick, yank the tooth. You stand there, cheeks stiffening, lips trembling, and you can't help but wonder, was this a punishment? A cure? Or just a medieval multitasking moment? Deal with your tooth and your frostbite in one go? Here's your mainstream historical fact. Hippocratic and Galenic medical theories heavily influenced medieval thinking. One of those theories involved balancing the body's humors, hot, cold, wet, and dry. If your pain was too hot, read, swollen, red, angry, then cooling was the obvious treatment. So yes, medieval physicians prescribed cold compresses, or just cold everything. Snow packed in cloth, icy water rinses, and even placing your face near stone walls chilled overnight. Sometimes patients were told to chew on snow. Sometimes they were told to sleep outdoors to cool the fevered blood in the gums. You're not sure who thought this was wise, but apparently enough people tried it to write it down. Historians still argue whether this exposure method was more ritual than remedy. Was it based on humoral theory, or folk tradition. Some suggest that it may have been a fusion of both, a blending of scholarly guesswork and practical desperation. Others argue that weather-based healing was simply what you did when you couldn't afford a barber surgeon or clothes. As you shiver there in your wool cloak, you notice another village woman crouched by the well, holding her young son's face to the stone. "Just until it tingles," she whispers as he squeals and writhes. You lock eyes with the boy for a moment, and both of you share the same thought. Humans are terrible at being human sometimes. But let's not forget our quirky tidbit. In some parts of Northern Europe, especially among isolated mountain communities, people believe that pain was a mischievous spirit that lived in warmth. Let your body get cold enough, and the spirit would flee in search of cozier prey. So in some villages, they'd not only make you stand in snow, they'd chant while you did it, scaring the spirit off with rhymes and the occasional rattle made from dried pig bones. It gets better. In one recorded case, a person with tooth pain was told to run 3 laps around a frozen field with a toad in each shoe. Why? Because the cold would numb the pain. The toads would absorb the evil, and you'd get a great story to tell at banquets. Maybe, back in the present, you're present. That is, you're beginning to lose sensation in your entire face. The ache has dulled, replaced by that odd hollow numbness like you've been hit with a frozen melon. Your fingers tingle. Your ears feel like crispy bread. But the tooth? It's quiet. It's dormant. A local healer waddles over, wrapped in 20 layers of mismatched wool. She eyes your pale cheeks and nods approvingly. Good. Now spit on the fire. You blink. What? Spit. Onto fire. It confuses the ache. Sure enough, there's a small brazier burning nearby. You hesitate, because obviously, and offer a glob of frozen saliva to the embers. They hiss. The healer cackles. You're unsure if anything has changed. Sometimes pain relief came down to ritual. A gesture, a symbol. Chew the bark of a cold tree. Sit on a stone carved with a saint's name. Hold a snowball made from the first snowfall of the season. These practices blurred the line between medicine and magic, which, in the Middle Ages, were barely different things. You finally retreat back inside, hands numb, ears red, and jaw feeling like it belongs to someone else entirely. But here's the bizarre truth. It helped. Maybe not because the cold balanced your humors or banished the pain demon, but because shock numbs, frost numbs, and desperation breeds a kind of brilliance. Just enough to take the edge off, just long enough to survive the next medieval solution. You slump into your chair by the hearth, face still tingling from the cold. And for now, the pain stays away, or hides, or waits. But let's not worry about that yet. Your jaw is almost back to normal. Not fine, of course. Let's not be ridiculous, but functional. The pain has retreated to a dull echo, humming quietly beneath your cheekbone like a bard who doesn't know when to stop singing. You've gone 3 days without crying into your broth, and that counts as progress. Still, you're not taking any chances, which is why you're here, in the chapel, kneeling beneath a crumbling mural of St. Apollonia, the patron saint of teeth. You didn't know there was a patron saint for teeth until the old woman down the road whispered her name while stirring a pot of turnip stew. Pray to her, she'd said. She knows what it's like. And oh, she does. The stone floor is cold beneath your knees. The candles smoke thick in the air. You look up at the faded painting. A young woman holding a pair of tongs. In the tongs, a tooth. Her face is serene, but you know her story, and it's not serene. St. Apollonia was martyred in Alexandria in the 3rd century. According to legend, her teeth were shattered, one by Roman soldiers trying to force her to renounce her faith. Instead, she leapt into the flames herself, choosing death over betrayal. And because medieval people loved a good combination of pain and holiness, She became the go-to girl for dental agony. And so now, centuries later, you kneel beneath her image, whispering a prayer for your gums, and that one molar that still twinges when you chew something thicker than porridge. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Invoking saints for specific ailments was a major part of medieval medicine. If you had a skin rash, you went to St. Bartholomew. Headache? St. Denis, though he was decapitated, which feels like a mixed message. Toothache? Apollonia. Her cult spread rapidly through Europe, especially in Germany and France. Churches erected altars in her name. Clergy blessed her effigy. Peasants whispered her name while clutching their swollen cheeks. Her veneration wasn't just symbolic. It was medicinal. People believed that praying to her could stop tooth pain, prevent dental disease, or even make a difficult extraction easier. Her name was engraved on amulets, stitched into charms, and recited like an incantation before bed. Some even believed her spirit would guard your teeth in the afterlife, ensuring you didn't spend eternity with a toothache. Frankly, that alone seems worth the candle wax. The chapel is quiet. You light a stubby candle and place it on the stone ledge. Its flicker dances across her mural, making her eyes shimmer faintly. You wonder what she would think of your modern suffering. Ice packs, dental floss, and anesthesia. Would she find it comforting or soft? Historians still argue whether Apollonia's cult arose organically through peasant devotion or was orchestrated by clergy looking to bolster certain theological narratives. Some suggest she was a convenient symbol, pain transfigured into sainthood. Others argue her popularity was grassroots, spread by word of mouth among those who couldn't afford clothes or blacksmith barbers. After all, anyone can pray. That's what made it powerful. You stand slowly, joints aching. At the back of the chapel, there's a wooden box labeled offerings. Inside, dried flowers, a child's carved tooth, and what appears to be a wool sock containing herbs. You add a copper coin, though it's probably worth less than the sock. As you turn to leave, a monk approaches. He's barefoot, his robe patched and threadbare. His eyes are kind of that distant way of people who've seen a lot and now mostly see inward. He speaks softly. She liked clothes too, you know. You blink. Who? Apollonia. Some say they gave her clove oil before the beating. For kindness. For mercy. He smiles faintly. Or maybe just to make her smell like heaven. That's your quirky tidbit for this evening. In some medieval legends, not the canonical ones, but the whispered local ones, Saint Apollonia was gifted clove blossoms by a sympathetic guard. She crushed them between her fingers and held them in her mouth as they broke her teeth, letting the numbing sweetness carry her soul upward. It's probably apocryphal, but stories are medicine too. Outside, the wind has settled. The village is quiet, cloaked in blue twilight. You pass by your neighbor, who nods solemnly and holds up a small painted token of Apollonia on a leather string. Put it under your pillow, she says, as though this is obvious. It keeps the tooth worms away. You're about to laugh, but stop, because tooth worms were very real to people like her. Tiny creatures believed to burrow into your teeth and cause the pain from within. They even made wax molds with little worm-shaped cavities to demonstrate it. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were entirely symbolic or based on real observations. Tiny nerve endings, perhaps, or rot patterns misread as burrows. Either way, a tiny saint token under the pillow, not the weirdest cure you've tried. That night, you sleep with Apollonia beneath your head, a clove-scented rag at your bedside, and a strange sense of being watched over. Not in a creepy way, but in the way of someone who knows what a shattered tooth feels like. And for once, the pain doesn't visit. Morning seeps in through your thatched roof like a quiet apology for existing. You wake with that cautious, muscle-testing awareness familiar to all chronic toothache survivors, mouth closed, jaw still. tongue probing gently. Still there, still aching, just a little, but manageable, which means it's time for the town fair. A rare distraction, really. Once a month, traders, performers, and travelers gather near the edge of your village. You pull on your best tunic, meaning the one with the fewest patches, and shuffle toward the noise drawn by the scent of roasted chestnuts and the faint, metallic clang of coins being poorly managed by overly excited children. It doesn't take long to spot the crowd. They're gathered near a rough wooden cart decorated in garish paint. Standing atop it, in a hat far too elaborate for his talent, is a man holding a set of iron pliers in one hand and a string of teeth in the other. "Come one, come all," he shouts, voice already cracking from overuse. Witness miracles, cry in ecstasy, and leave with one less pain. You've arrived at the miracle theater of the traveling tooth puller. This is no ordinary tradesman. This is a showman, a performance artist of pain. And today, he's not just pulling teeth, he's numbing them. At least, that's what he claims. You squint, try to decipher the mysterious brownish smear he's applying to each poor soul's gums before the pliers go in. "Root of mandrake," he announces, as a boy screams and faints theatrically behind him, blessed by 3 bishops and 1 very sarcastic monk. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mandrake root was genuinely used as a painkiller in the medieval world. It contained scopolamine and hyoscyamine, natural alkaloids that induced drowsiness, hallucinations, and numbness. Physicians and apothecaries considered it valuable, though dangerous. Too much, and you wouldn't feel pain, because you'd be too busy dying. Too little, and your tooth would still scream at full volume. Which means traveling pullers like the man before you usually work with very small doses. So small that the numbing effects were debatable at best and imaginary at worst. Still, he waves a dark glass vial like it's holy water. Mandragora officinarum, he calls, plucked under the moon, beside a gallows. You'll have to forgive his flair. Mandrake root came with a lot of superstition. People believed it could only be safely harvested during specific celestial alignments, and that it screamed when uprooted, killing whoever heard it. Hence the myth of tying a dog to plant, running away, and letting it do the pulling. If the dog survived, you had a usable mandrake. If not, well, you didn't. You edge closer, and there it is, your quirky tidbit. One traveling puller was said to chant nonsensical rhymes while applying mandrake, claiming it was the only way to keep the root from stealing your soul. According to a 14th century scribbled note from somewhere in Bohemia, he insisted that humming helped distract the tooth spirit. Others believed the mandrake's magic only worked if you didn't know it was being used, so they'd hide it in bread or rub it on the pliers when the patient wasn't looking. The show continues. A woman with a blackened molar steps up. She winces as a dark paste is rubbed into her gum, and the crowd leans in. "Now count to 12 backward," the puller cries, "and bite your tongue for luck." Then snap, crack. She slumps, half in relief, half in shock. The tooth is held aloft like a knighted relic. Cheers erupt. You stay back, uncertain. It's not just a performance, it's the possibility. If it works, if the root is real, maybe it's worth it. But here's the shadow side. Historians still argue whether these traveling tooth pullers were licensed professionals or glorified con artists. Some likely had genuine training, perhaps apprenticed under a barber surgeon or taught by a monastic healer. Others were former jesters, drunkards, or people who simply liked blood. There's record of one healer who also juggled knives and tried to extract molars with his feet. He didn't last long. You're handed a small wax stamp leaflet. An indulgence of sorts. Guaranteed relief, blessed herb, only minor drooling. There's a drawing of mandrake root that looks suspiciously like a shrieking baby with fangs. You fold it into your cloak, unsure whether you'll keep it or burn it later. The show winds down. The puller tips his ridiculous hat, bows, and pockets coins from a shallow basket at his feet. A few stay behind, trying to haggle for root scraps or leftovers from the jar. One sniff, someone begs, just one, my tooth singing hymns. You smile painfully, because that's exactly what yours is doing now. Soft, haunting notes humming behind your ear. And maybe, just maybe, you're starting to believe in the power of showmanship. or desperation. You drift away from the fair, letting the noise fall behind. In your pocket, the wax leaflet crinkles. And for a moment, the ache dims, not from medicine, but from the distraction of spectacle, laughter, and the strange comfort of watching someone else scream louder than you do. You don't head straight home after the fair. Not yet. There's something unsettled in your bones. Maybe it's a lingering echo of that woman's scream, sharp and triumphant, as if she'd slain the pain herself. Maybe it's the mandrake myth whispering in your ears, or the fact that you almost stepped forward to be next. Almost. Instead, you find yourself wandering the edge of the woods where the road splits, a path to your village in one direction, and in the other, a trail leading up toward the priory. That quiet old stone place where monks tend bees, copy books, and, most importantly, keep a herb garden that could rival a royal kitchen. You veer left. The priory gate is low and crooked. It's with damp with moss. A bell rope hangs to one side, stiff with rain and age. You tug it gently, and somewhere within you hear the soft toll of iron and sandalwood. A moment later, a small man in robes appears. His head is shaved into a tonsure, so wide he could use it as a soup bowl. He smiles. You look like someone who's trying not to bite their own face. Fair, you explain, haltingly, and he listens with the patience of someone who's seen far worse. When you mention mandrake, he raises a finger. Come, he says, and gesture for you to follow. You enter the herbarium, an airy cloister tucked behind the chapel, its walls crawling with ivy and the scent of rosemary, sage, and something faintly medicinal. Shelves line the walls, cluttered with clay pots, dried leaves, and little painted wooden labels. He reaches into one jar and pulls out a sliver of bark. Willow, he says. It's not as flashy as mandrake, but it's a faithful friend. Chew on this, and the pain may hush for a time. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Willow bark contains salicin, a chemical compound that modern scientists recognize as a precursor to aspirin. Long before it was synthesized in labs, medieval healers used it for pain, fever, and inflammation, crushed into poultices or steeped in water. It became a quiet cornerstone of natural medicine. You chew. It's bitter, earthy, and leaves your tongue feeling slightly woolen. But beneath the bitterness, the flicker of relief. Not gone, but softened, like someone turned the volume knob on your misery ever so slightly down. The monk watches you with a knowing smile. Not all pain needs a spectacle, he murmurs. As he speaks, he leads you to another shelf. Here, he shows you clothes, tiny brown flower buds with heads like nails. Imported, he explains. Rare, but powerful. He crushes one and hands it to you. The scent is sharp, almost sweet, and instantly recognizable from those childhood winter stews. You bite down gently, pressing it against the aching tooth. A slow burn spreads through your gum, warm and numbing. It's not magic, but it's something. Then comes your quirky tidbit. In one dusty corner of the priory, the monk shows you an ancient little tool, carved from ivory, shaped like a tiny shoehorn. For scraping the tongue, he says, and sometimes used creatively. Apparently, some monks would use tools like this to gently scratch the inner gum around a decaying tooth, creating micro wounds. Why? Because when they rubbed herbs like clove or willow extract into freshly abraded skin, the numbing would intensify. Risky, of course. Infection loomed. But if done carefully, it allowed the herb's power to seep in more directly. Historians still argue whether this technique was common knowledge among monastic healers or fringe practice known only to isolated abbeys. Some argue it stemmed from Roman traditions passed down in dusty manuscripts. Others suggest it evolved independently, out of sheer desperation and careful observation. The monk hands you the tool. Try if you dare, he says, but there's no pressure. We all have our thresholds. You don't try it. Not yet. But the idea hums in your mind like a secret. You tuck the ivory scraper into your satchel beside the clove. As you prepare to leave, he gives you a linen pouch of willow bark and a parting nod. Pain wants your attention, he says, but it doesn't always deserve it. Outside, the wind stirs through the trees. Your footsteps crunch softly on the path. And for a time, just a little time, the ache behind your tooth forgets to ache. Or maybe you just forget to listen. You walk home in near silence, your pockets heavy with bark, clove, and mystery. And somewhere behind you, in the cloister, a monk returns to his bees, knowing he's made one more evening slightly easier. By now, your toothache has become a part of you, like a neighbor who moved in without asking and plays the same sad song every night. But tonight, you've got your monk-gifted pouch of bark, your lone clove, and that peculiar ivory scraper whispering promises it probably can't keep. The fire in your cottage crackles, casting dancing shadows on the walls. You sit by the hearth with a tin mug of warm elderberry water, watching the steam rise and wondering how many other poor souls across centuries have done the same, trading dinner for distraction, trying to sit past pain. As the ache hums low, your mind drifts again to something the monk mentioned just in passing. If the bark doesn't work, he said, there's always the apothecary in Danebridge, a little less reverent but more inventive. So, of course you decide to go, because nothing says healthy life choices like chasing strange medieval dentists across muddy roads for questionable potions. Danebridge is a half-day's walk, depending on your stamina, the mud depth, and how often you stop to question your life decisions. You arrive around midday, boots soaked, and teeth still pulsing like they're drumming for attention. The apothecary is impossible to miss. A squat building with painted symbols, some alchemical, some maybe just bad guesses, adorning its timber frame. A crude drawing of jaw hangs over the door like a heraldic sign. Inside, smells, strong ones, a slap of vinegar, lavender, sulfur, and something that reminds you vaguely of overcooked onions and regret. Behind the counter stands a woman in a soot-streaked apron. Her eyes are sharp, her fingernails suspiciously green, and she doesn't say hello. You're here for the numb paste, she says flatly. Caught. She points to a jar the size of your fist. Inside, a thick gray paste with flecks of something red and glossy. You sure? She asks. Last man tried it. Said he couldn't feel his jaw for 3 days. Also, forgot his own name for 6 hours. You hesitate, long enough for her to add, that was the good batch. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many medieval apothecaries used compounds derived from opium, particularly in the form of laudanum, an alcohol-based tincture of the poppy plant. It was potent, addictive, and widely misunderstood. Used topically or ingested, it could numb pain, ease fevers, or knock you into next week. The apothecary nods toward the shelf. We mix it with belladonna now. Less drooling, more drifting. Belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade. Quirky name, serious business. Its berries are glossy and black, like something designed by a malevolent toy maker. And inside them, atropine, a compound that messes with your nervous system in fun and unpredictable ways. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some apothecaries believe belladonna clarified the soul. One even claimed it allowed you to see inside your own teeth, which sounds poetic until you realize he may have meant it literally. There are accounts, highly disputed, of people claiming to witness the evil spirits inside their molars during intense hallucinations caused by herbal concoctions. You're offered a taste, just a fingertip's worth of the paste. It smells like licorice and vinegar, with a hint of raw turnip. You dab it onto the tender gum, hold your breath, and wait. The burn is immediate. Then comes a wave of tingling. First a gum, then your cheek, and then, weirdly, your eyebrow. But the pain dulls. Your tongue feels like it's been replaced with a warm stone. But it's better. Careful, she says. Too much. And your heart starts forgetting what it's doing. Historians still argue whether these mixtures were precise enough to be considered safe or if medieval apothecaries were simply talented guessers. Records vary. Some praise their skill. Others describe entire villages poisoned after a single batch of bad bomb. She hands you a wrap bundle and adds, "That'll keep for 2 moons. After that, it starts talking." You hope she's joking. Outside, the air is crisp, and for the first time in days, your jaw isn't clenching involuntarily. You walk slower. Even the bird song feels less annoying. On your way out of Danebridge, you pass a small chapel with stained glass windows. A priest stands near the entrance, eyeing you warily. "Been to the apothecary?" he asks. You nod. He tuts. "Be careful. That woman believes in tooth demons." "Don't we all?" You leave town with a pouch of something that might be salvation or hallucination, a warning from a man of God, and just enough numbness to imagine that your molar has surrendered. It hasn't, of course, but for tonight, the battle is quiet. The numbness lasts well into the night, lulling you into a strange, floaty calm. Your jaw feels detached, as if it's hovering half a pace behind you. For once, you sleep through the night without waking to a familiar gnaw of pain, and when you do stir, it's not the ache that wakes you. It's the memory. That priest's warning. She believes in tooth demons. You roll onto your back, staring at the ceiling. Part of you laughs it off. It's just superstition. The kind of thing people say when they don't understand medicine, or when a tooth cracks during Lent and they can't blame the fish. But another part of you, the part still haunted by the screaming woman at the fair, remembers a time before bark, before monks, before apothecaries, when pain had only one explanation: punishment. So you start asking questions. The village has no shortage of lore. Every crone you speak to, every farmer missing a molar, every shepherd chewing the edge of a stick has a theory. Toothache, it seems, lives not just in the flesh, but in the story of the land. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many medieval Europeans genuinely believed in toothworms, tiny creatures that burrowed into teeth and caused decay. This belief persisted well into the 18th century. Some even claimed to see these worms wriggling out when teeth were pulled, though it's more likely they mistook shredded nerve tissue or infection for something alive. You visit an old weaver who insists she once spat out a white worm after biting on a clove too hard. She says it whispered in Latin as it died. You choose not to question that detail. But here's the quirky tidbit. In certain remote parts of Europe, particularly in the Carpathians and along forested pockets of Germany, people believe that toothaches were caused by cursed breath. Not bad breath, but literally breath with intent. Sent from a jealous neighbor, a wronged lover, or a demon that had sniffed you while you slept. To counter it, some communities employed charm makers or breath breakers, people who specialize in crafting small bundles of herbs, teeth from animals, and silver scraps wrapped in linen. These were worn like amulets or buried under thresholds to trap the curse. You even see one in your cousin's cottage, tucked behind a rafter beam, still dangling with owl feathers and dried rue. Historians still argue whether these practices were rooted in pagan traditions or if they emerged independently across various regions as a form of folk trauma response. Some suggest they were a natural extension of medieval medicine's blurry line between the physical and the spiritual. After all, when pain lingers long enough, it starts to feel like a haunting. You find yourself drawn to a weathered woman on the edge of town, a self-proclaimed midwife and charm weaver. She invites you in, offers you a stool by the fire, and begins to hum as she grinds something in a stone mortar. Pain, she says without prompting, is a traveler. It finds the hollow parts of you and makes camp. She lifts the lid from a copper pot, releasing steam scented with mint and something darker, earthy, almost metallic. If you want it gone, she continues, you must make it leave. You're not sure what that means, but you know it anyway. The ritual she performs is simple and strange. A circle of salt around your chair. A string tied from your wrist to a bone-handled comb. She places a sliver of animal tooth on your tongue and tells you not to swallow. It tastes like dust and old secrets. She chants low and rhythmically, half lullaby, half warning. You feel silly, then sleepy, then quiet. There's no flash of light, no tooth demon crawling out of your ear. But when she cuts the string, your jaw no longer pulses with heat. Just stillness. Not numb, not gone, just waiting. You walk home under a sky thick with stars, wondering if the ritual worked, or if maybe the placebo effect has a cloak and staff now. Later, when you open the linen pouch she gave you, you find a scrap of parchment with a single sentence scrawled on it. Asterisk if the worm returns. Feed it fire. Asterisk. Sleep comes easy that night. The kind of deep, blanket-heavy sleep that makes you forget what you were so worried about. No pain. No pressure. Just a memory of that firelit circle, that ancient chant, and a whisper of breath you hope wasn't cursed. By morning, you feel something you haven't felt in weeks, relief. The pain hasn't just faded. It's gone. Completely. Your jaw doesn't throb. Your gums don't sting. And even your tongue seems to have forgiven you for last week's clove incident. You chew a crust of bread, carefully, suspiciously. And when it doesn't end in regret, you exhale with a sort of fragile joy. Maybe the charm weaver was right. Maybe the worm really did leave. Or maybe your body just needed time and a little well-placed theater. But deep down, you know better. Medieval toothaches rarely just vanished. They hibernated. And you've lived long enough to suspect this one is just lurking, waiting to reemerge like a bad ballad in a tavern. So you do what anyone in your position would. You ask more questions. Because even though the pain is gone, the curiosity is not. You begin visiting barbers. Yes, barbers. Back then, they weren't just responsible for haircuts and beards. In the absence of formal surgical training or widespread medical institutions, barber surgeons stepped in. They cut hair, drained blood, set bones, pulled teeth, and occasionally amputated limbs between shaves. Multitasking medieval style. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the 12th century, barber surgeons were officially recognized in many European cities. They trained under apprenticeships, and some even belonged to respected guilds, though still ranked below physicians and far below university-trained doctors. A red and white pole outside their shop symbolized the blood and bandages of their trade. You visit one in a bustling market town. He's tall, gruff, with hands like weathered oak and a smile that shows more gaps than teeth. His chair is just a stool bolted to a wooden platform. There's a bucket nearby you choose not to look into. He's mid-leeching when you arrive, applying fat, wriggling leeches to a man's temples as a preventative measure for melancholia. You wait, politely, avoid eye contact. When you finally speak with him, his advice is pragmatic. If the ache's gone, don't go hunting for it. But if it comes back, hot needle under the tooth. Always works. Hot needle. You must look horrified because he chuckles and waves a soot-blackened poker. Not through it, he says. Asterisk under asterisk it. You heat the needle till it glows, then press it to the gum. Burns the worm. Numbs the root. Right, because pain is best treated by more pain. Genius. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some barber surgeons use fennel smoke enemas. Yes, you heard that correctly. As a treatment for toothaches. The belief was that pain in the head could be redirected or expelled to the body's other vents. It's like trying to fix your upstairs plumbing by setting fire to the basement. You ask if anyone still tries that method. He gives you a long stare, then shrugs. Old Gerald swears by it, but he also thinks his pig talks in Latin. Enough said. Historians still argue whether barber surgeons helped or hindered the progress of medicine. Some view them as essential stopgaps. Brave, practical, unafraid of blood. Others claim they contributed to countless unnecessary deaths with their unsterilized tools, aggressive treatments, and disdain for scholarly learning. The truth, as always, likely lies in between muddy, bloody, and missing a few molars. You leave the shop with a few new ideas, several regrets, and a lingering scent of old leather and vinegar. As you walk back through the market, you spot something peculiar, a traveling entertainer hawking miracle teeth stones. He juggles small pebbles while yelling, "Rub this on your jaw, and you'll never need a barber again." You watch as people line up. Desperate faces, aching mouths, hopeful coin. Part of you wants to scoff. Part of you, if you're honest, wants to ask if he accepts trade. You don't, but it reminds you, pain makes people do strange things, believe stranger ones. That night, as you sit by the fire, tongue probing the memory of pain like a phantom limb, you feel something shift, a shadow beneath the surface. Just a twitch, nothing serious. Probably, but you wrap the charm tight around your wrist anyway, just in case. And as the flames crackle and the wind groans low against the shutters, you wonder, was it ever really just a toothache? Or have you been fighting something older, something deeper, something with breath and name and purpose? The worm, after all, doesn't always crawl. Sometimes it waits. The ache returns slowly, like an old friend knocking politely before breaking the door down. It starts as a low pressure in your jaw, just beneath the cheekbone. Then by sundown, it pulses like a drum, steady, insistent, and very much alive. You chew a mint leaf. Nothing. You rub the miracle tombstone. It does not perform miracles. You even whisper the charm weaver's line, asterisk feet of fire asterisk, though without much conviction. Because the truth is, the mystery is unraveling into inevitability. You're going to need another remedy. This time, you seek someone different, a university-trained physician. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the 13th century, universities like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford were offering structured medical training. Physicians learned Galenic theory, anatomy, often from ancient texts rather than corpses, and the balance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Dental pain, naturally, was attributed to an imbalance of these elements. You journey 2 days on foot to reach a cathedral city where one such physician practices. He is cloaked in velvet, his fingers adorned with rings, and he smells faintly of cloves, parchment, and, oddly, wet dog. His consulting room is lined with scrolls, jars, and instruments that wouldn't look out of place in a carpenter's kit. He listens to your description, nods gravely, and opens a thick volume with worn edges. The pain, he says, is rooted in melancholic congestion of the brain's vapors. He prescribes a solution with alarming confidence. Purge the melancholy. How? With a laxative. And treacle. Oh, and fasting. For at least 3 days. You stare. That's it. He nods solemnly. And bathe your feet in mustard oil. Pain in the head flows downward. Right, because obviously, teeth and toes are emotionally connected. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some medieval physicians also advise listening to music as part of a holistic remedy for toothaches. Not just any music. Mind you, specific modes believed to suit the humors. Lydian mode for phlegm, Dorian for melancholy. A whole soundscape of wellness, like a medieval Spotify playlist curated by Aristotle. So you try it. You sit in a chapel during choir practice, letting the Gregorian chants wash over you. The pain doesn't vanish, but for a moment, it softens. The arches above, the flicker of candlelight, the slow, echoing syllables. It's like your skull breathes out. Still, the ache is stubborn, unimpressed by melody or mustard. That night, you lie in a guest cot at the physician's hall, tossing between hot flashes and dreams of worms gnawing through parchment scrolls. In one vision, a skeleton in a red velvet robe hands you a tooth made of glass and whispers, "All pain is borrowed." In the morning, the physician offers a final solution: cauterization. That's right, he wants to burn the gum, sever the nerve, and release the trapped vapors. He shows you a glowing iron rod, still warm from the fire, and explains where he'd press it. Right behind the molar, near the hinge of the jaw. You do not stay for breakfast. As you stumble back into the daylight, jaw still twitching, a passerby nudges you and says, "He tried that on my brother. Now he whistles when he eats." Historians still argue whether medieval physicians helped progress medical understanding or merely prolonged ancient misconceptions. Some insist they preserved and translated invaluable ancient knowledge. Others argue their blind loyalty to outdated theories, like Galen's humors, stalled advancement by centuries. You start to suspect that your tooth knows all of this, that it's somehow aware of these debates and is laughing from the inside out. By the time you return to your village, you're exhausted, but something else has shifted too. You're no longer just enduring the pain. You're trying to understand it, track its patterns, learn its moods, and it's teaching you. At sunset, while sitting under the ash tree near the well, you run your tongue across the gum and notice something. Something new, a tiny ridge, not bone, not tooth. Something alive? The worm? No, you're not ready to go full exorcism just yet. But whatever it is, it's moving. You do what any sane medieval person would do. You panic. Then you remember the comb. The bone-handled one from the charm weaver. Still tied with a thread, now tucked in your satchel. You set a fire, draw the circle, say the chant. You place the comb near your jaw and whisper the phrase once more. If the worm returns, the smoke curls around you, the air stills, and somewhere deep beneath your gum, something twitches. Again. By morning, your gum feels hot, swollen, and distinctly personal, as if it started writing its own diary entries. You wake to the taste of metal and the feeling that something is dug in. The worm, if it exists, is nesting. You don't panic. Much. Instead, you stagger to the hearth, boil water in a cracked kettle, and dunk a cloth until it steams. You hold it against your cheek and hum whatever chant the charm weaver half sang 2 nights ago. Maybe you're doing it right. Maybe you're just steaming your face. But something in your gut tells you the pain has entered a new phase. You need a tooth puller. This time, you're done with clothes smugglers and velvet-coated physicians. You want someone with strong arms, no illusions, and very low standards of hygiene. You find him the next town over, at a horse fair, naturally. He's set up under a patchy red tent, flanked by crates of tools and a barrel that probably doubles as a chair and a vomit bucket. His sign reads, asterisk teeth out, cheap and fast. No screaming, half price, asterisk. He's everything you'd expect. Missing half his teeth, a stained apron, and forearms like braided rope. But his grip is firm and his eyes, surprisingly kind. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Professional tooth pullers were common in medieval Europe, often operating as part of public fairs. They performed extractions in full view of a crowd, sometimes with musicians playing loudly nearby, to drown out the patient's screams. It wasn't just medicine, it was theater. You watch him work on a farmer first. No numbing, of course, just a wooden stick between the teeth, a quick wrench with iron pliers, and a squirt of blood that earns a cheer from the crowd. Then it's your turn. He pats your shoulder. Just scream loud and kick if it helps. He doesn't ask which tooth. He knows. You sit on the barrel. He presses a knee to your chest. The pliers go in. The cold metal scrapes your tongue, and then, without ceremony, he pulls. It's not pain. It's pressure turned into lightning. A bright, white-hot pop. You hear in your spine. You see stars. You bite your own tongue. Your legs kick. Then silence. Except the tooth is still there. He frowns. Deep root, he mutters, like a mule's hoof. He tries again. Wrenches harder. Something snaps. A piece comes free, but not all of it. He holds up half a tooth, glistening, cracked down the center. We'll get the rest. You decide this man is both a genius and a criminal. Here's the quirky tidbit. In some places, traveling tooth pullers work with tooth fairies. No, not the kind who leave coins. These were assistants in costume, often dressed as angels or mystical beings, who danced, distracted the crowd, and handed out herbal salves after the extraction. You spot one now, a young woman in a feathered cap offering tiny bags of salt and sage. She winks at you for the wound and your dreams. You clutch the salt pouch with a suspicious amount of hope. Historians still argue whether these public pullings did more harm than good. Some believe they helped democratize treatment, accessible to rich and poor alike. Others argue the lack of sanitation and follow-up led to more deaths than extractions. Either way, they were wildly popular. Tooth pain, like everything else, had an audience. That night, back in your cot, you cradle your face. It's bleeding, throbbing, empty. You spit rust into a rag. You don't speak. You don't eat. You barely breathe. But the pressure is gone. You lie there in the dark, fingers curled around a little linen salt bag. And for the first time in what feels like years, you smile. A gap-toothed, swollen, lopsided smile. But still, later, as you drift asleep, you think about the half-tooth he couldn't get, the root still buried inside you, still twitching, still warm. You wake before dawn to a jaw that feels stitched together by fire. Swollen doesn't even begin to describe it. You can't open your mouth more than a finger's width. And when you try, something beneath the gum pulses like a second heartbeat. The root is still there. You sit up slowly, eyes gritty, breath sour with blood and salt. For a moment, you consider returning to the tooth puller. Maybe he could finish the job, complete the extraction, and finally rip this demon root out once and for all. But your gut tells you otherwise. That man had strong arms, yes, but the look on his face when he saw the fractured root, that flash of unease, told you everything. He hadn't expected resistance. No, this root is not ordinary. You need someone who treats teeth like relics. Sacred, dangerous. You need a bone doctor. These were fringe healers, tucked between folklore and medicine. Rare regional. Usually women, and often shunned by both the church and professional guilds. Bone doctors treated breaks, infections, and joint pain. But some of them, particularly in the alpine valleys and deep Slavic woods, were known to speak to bones. Literally, you trek eastward, led by rumors and whispers from travelers. It takes days. Your face bloats like a boiled plum. Villagers avoid your eyes. Dogs growl at your scent. Finally, in a clearing dotted with red-stemmed foxglove and mossy stumps, you find her. She's older than river stones. Her hut smells of beeswax and burnt thyme. She doesn't speak much, just points to a stool, then to your face. You sit. The forest creaks around you. She presses a thumb to your cheek, hums low, then she reaches for something in a pouch. A thin, carved rod made from what looks like deer bone. At the tip, a circle of etched runes. She doesn't pull your tooth. She listens to it. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Some remote communities in medieval Europe believed that certain illnesses spoke through bone. Shamans or wise women, often labeled witches, claimed they could interpret the stories bones held. Teeth, as the most enduring part of the skeleton, were said to hold grudges. You don't know if it's real, but as she runs that bone rod along your jaw, you swear you hear a low hum in your skull, like tuning a string, like something waking. She stops, frowns, says, "It isn't just a root, it's a memory." You blink. "Hey, what?" She holds up a small mirror, tarnished with age. "Look at your eye." You do. It's bloodshot, yes, tired, but there beneath the redness is something else. A flicker, not light, not shadow, something moving. She explains in her low, musical voice that some believe trauma can anchor itself in the body, not metaphorically, literally. She's seen it before. A man haunted by a battlefield. His left knee refused to heal. A woman who lost a child. Her ribs ached every spring. And once, a boy who watched a priest hang. His molar rotted, and no one could stop the pain until the rope that killed the priest was burned and scattered. You stare. She shrugs. Sometimes pain isn't only flesh. Sometimes it's history. Here's your quirky tidbit. In parts of medieval Finland and Hungary, healers believed certain teeth could carry ancestral guilt. If a tooth hurt without injury, it meant someone in your bloodline had lied during a vow. The cure? Confession, not yours, but your ancestors. You were expected to dream of their crime and speak it aloud under moonlight. Historians still argue whether such practices were superstition or proto-psychological healing. Were these rituals a way of addressing mental trauma through symbolic acts? Or were they merely desperate explanations in the absence of science? You sit with that thought. When she finally treats you, it's not with fire or metal. She places a hot clay poultice against your cheek, filled with elder bark and crushed henbane, numbing, pungent, and strangely soothing. Then she wraps your jaw in linen and paints a symbol over your temple in ash. "It will sleep," she says, "but it's never gone." You nod, drowsy from the henbane. She hands you a pouch before you leave. Inside, something round and light, too light for stone. It's a tooth, human, burnished, carved with a symbol you recognize from the charm weaver's bone comb. "Yours now," she says. "Keep it close. If the ache wakes again, feed it this." You don't ask what she means. The forest seems to lean in as you walk away, wind through the trees, cool against your cheek. The ache dulls. Not gone, but held. You feel like something closed its eyes inside you, but you don't yet know if it dreams. You carry the carved tooth in your pouch like a relic. Though part of you suspects it might just be a polite way of handing off someone else's curse. Either way, the ache in your jaw is quieted, for now. The forest, the henbane, the whispers of ancestral guilt. It's all behind you, but something clings to your breath, like the smell of wet leaves on cloth long after the rain. You begin the slow walk back toward familiar lands, jaw bandaged, stomach empty, pouch clinking softly with dried herbs and one mysterious molar. There's a spring in your step now, or maybe it's a limp. It's hard to tell with your face still frozen, in a crooked half-grimace. You catch your reflection in a still pond and barely recognize the person looking back. A little leaner, a lot more tired, and with a kind of quiet suspicion in your eyes that wasn't there before. You're not just someone who has pain anymore. You've been through it. But you're not quite done. Because you're still curious, still chasing the why behind the pain. Why does a single tooth, cause so much havoc? Why does it throb in the night, like it knows you're vulnerable? Why does it refuse to be forgotten, even when extracted? The next stop isn't a healer, or a puller, or even a charm weaver. It's a scholar. You reach a monastery tucked into a high ridge, cold wind slapping your cloak like an impatient teacher. The monks here are Benedictines, known for preserving ancient texts, medical, spiritual, and everything in between. You barter your help in the orchard and spend the better part of a week copying Latin phrases until your fingers cramped. Finally, one of the older brothers, Brother Alaric, with a face like pressed linen, allows you into the scriptorium's locked alcove. He opens a cabinet and pulls out a volume bound in cracked leather. Inside, diagrams of teeth, notes in Greek and Arabic, marginalia scrawled by nervous monks trying to reconcile scripture with science. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Much of medieval Europe's dental knowledge came through translations of Arabic medical texts. Scholars like Avicenna and Al-Zarawi documented detailed procedures for treating abscesses, crafting dental instruments, and even using gold wire to stabilize loose teeth. Their work filtered into Europe via Spain and Sicily, preserved and studied by monastic scribes. Brother Alaric taps a drawing, a molar with long, twisting roots. Teeth, he says, are anchors of the skull. In some texts, they are called stones of memory. You blink. Memory? He nods. The ancients believed that each tooth held a different aspect of a person's experience, not just for chewing, but for remembering, fear, anger, sorrow. Some even said the third molar held dreams. You stare at the page. Suddenly, your aching jaw doesn't feel like a nuisance. It feels like a diary refusing to close. He pulls another book, this one written in a strange, angular script. Nordic, maybe. Inside, drawings of skulls with glowing teeth, each one inscribed with runes. There's one symbol that makes your skin crawl. It's the same symbol on the carved tooth in your pouch. You don't say anything. He closes the book gently, like tucking a child. Pain, he says, is often described as punishment, but in these texts, it's sometimes described as invitation, a calling to notice, to remember. You nod slowly, unsure if you're moved or simply sleep-deprived. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some remote regions of medieval Wales and Brittany, it was believed that a person's toothache could be caused by unspoken stories, events or truths they refused to acknowledge. To treat it, some would bury the offending tooth beneath a stone marked with their secret, hoping the earth would absorb the pain. You leave the monastery not with a cure, but with a question that hums in your chest. What am I still holding? Historians still argue whether this symbolic view of teeth was superstition or an early form of psychosomatic understanding. Some interpret these beliefs as metaphors, ways to give meaning to unexplained suffering. Others think they may reflect a primitive but accurate recognition that the body and mind are deeply intertwined. You descend from the ridge in silence. That night, you sleep by a crumbling well. The wind whispers through the stones like it's saying your name. You dream of your own teeth, but they're made of glass now, and inside each one floats a tiny memory. Your mother's laugh, the scrape of your first fall, a candle blown out too soon. When you wake, your jaw still hurts, but it feels different now, like it's not just something to fix. It's something to listen to. You've made peace with the idea that your toothache isn't just a rogue nerve, a chunk of rotting calcium, or a sign of personal failure to floss, which, frankly, no one in the medieval world was doing anyway. Instead, your jaw's dull, persistent throb now feels like an echo, not a scream anymore, not even a moan, just a quiet, rhythmic reminder that something once mattered. Maybe it still does. So naturally you decide to poke it, not physically. You've had enough of that. No more pliers, no more bone rods, no more stewed henbane. This time, you go looking for stories. The kind passed mouth to mouth, over bread and wine, by candlelight in smoky halls and shivering under barn rafters. You want to know how other people endured the same agony, and what they believed about it. You follow the trade roads, eavesdropping where you can. Inns are gold mines. You drink terrible ale and pretend to be uninterested, while farmers, soldiers, and millers casually describe their worst pain. Oh, aye, says one man with a voice like gravel. My uncle swore the devil pinches gums when he lied too often. Teeth don't rot, insists a milkmaid in a veil embroidered with lambs. They die when you think wicked thoughts while chewing. My father buried his molar in a beehive, murmurs a shepherd. Said the bees knew how to hum away pain. These aren't medical theories. These are folk truths, unshaken by absence of evidence. And what's strange is, some of them start to make sense. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Most medieval peasants had limited or no access to trained healers. Their knowledge came through oral tradition, passed from elders and reinforced by experience. These beliefs weren't random. They were built on observation, repetition, and collective memory. If honey soothed pain, or if fasting seemed to help a swollen face, then those practices survived. You start collecting these stories like charms, not to use them, just to know them. One boy claims that his grandmother fixed his aching tooth by spitting in a well while reciting the name of Saint Apollonia, patron saint of toothaches, naturally, and waiting until a fish leapt from the water. When it did, the pain stopped. You chuckle at first, but then you wonder, why Saint Apollonia? Here's your quirky tidbit. Apollonia was a Christian martyr from the 3rd century. During her torture, all of her teeth were shattered or pulled out. In medieval iconography, she's often shown holding golden pincers gripping a molar. People lit candles to her in chapels, wore pendants of her likeness, and even scraped dust from statues of her to sprinkle into wine as a remedy. She wasn't just a saint, she was a divine dentist. You visit a roadside shrine and see her image etched into wood, tiny and weather-worn, with the telltale pliers raised like a trophy. Someone's left a little jar of milk beside it, and beneath that, a child's tooth. You're not sure if it's superstition or prayer, or both. Historians still argue whether folk medicine like this hindered or helped real medical advancement. Some claim it slowed the acceptance of scientific practices. Others argue that in a world without anesthesia, antiseptics, or germ theory, such rituals were emotionally vital, a way to feel control where there was none. One night, while camped beneath a ruined Roman arch, you try something foolish. You take the carved molar from your pouch, press it to your lips, and whisper the things you've never said aloud. Regrets, names, a memory you buried too deep to admit it hurt. You don't expect anything to happen, and nothing does at first, but your jaw stops throbbing. It doesn't feel healed. It feels heard. You sit in the dark, moonlight slipping through stone, and for a moment, the silence is complete. Then an owl hoots distant and low. You laugh, because of course it does. This is your life now, spilling secrets to ancient dental talismans under pagan ruins. And yet, you feel better. Not cured, but clearer. You wonder how many others have done the same, offered their pain not to medicine, but to myth, and how many found, in the telling, something gentler than science could give. You're walking slower now, not because the pain is back, it's still strangely absent, but because you don't feel the same rush anymore. You've traced the ache through leeches and litanies, across nettle fields and monastery halls. You've laid it on altars and whispered it into carved ivory. And through all that wandering, you've come to realize something oddly comforting. Toothaches, like stories, want to be passed along. So here you are, back in a small village not unlike the one you left, smoke curling from crooked chimneys and chickens pecking at frost-covered earth. A familiar place, though it isn't home. You've changed too much for that. You pause outside the cottage of Midwife, one of the few women in this region known to practice a bit of everything. Birthing, bleeding, brewing, and sometimes, yes, pulling teeth. You enter not to be healed, but to share. To let someone else know the many ways pain can be understood. She's older, maybe 60, with hands stained from yarrow and a face that folds into a smile when you hand her your pouch. Inside, the carved molar, the henbane sprig, a strip of cloth rubbed with beeswax. You tell her everything about the monk's theory of memory teeth, about the saints and their pincers, about the owls and the whispering tooth buried beneath your thoughts. She listens, doesn't laugh, doesn't scoff, just listens, like someone who's seen too many strange things to dismiss any one of them. You've done good, she says. Not all pain wants curing. Some pain just wants company. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the late Middle Ages, midwives and female healers often handled minor surgical procedures, including dental ones, especially in rural communities. They used herbal poultices, smoke fumigation, and surprisingly effective traction tools. But they were also spiritual caretakers, absorbing people's pain as much as they treated it. She shows you one of her tools, a slender iron hook looped at the end. It's stained but sharp, and she explains how it's used to extract splintered tooth roots left behind by braver, less careful hands. You flinch slightly, instinctively pressing your jaw. Oh, not for you, she chuckles. Yours already left what it came to say. She lights a tallow candle and begins brewing something over a low fire, not for pain, but for sleep, lavender, chamomile, and just a pinch of crushed apple bark, an old recipe to soothe the nervous heart. She asks if you want to leave the molar behind. Let her bury it with the others she keeps near the stream. You nod, not because you're afraid of it, but because you're ready to make room. She takes it gently, wraps it in linen, hums something in a language older than you recognize. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some parts of medieval Ireland, it was believed that burying a tooth near moving water allowed one's pain to be carried away by the spirits of the current. These tooth streams were kept secret, shared only between women, passed down in hushes and lullabies. Historians still argue whether such rituals were spiritual acts, medical necessity, or proto-psychology in disguise. Some say they were harmless traditions. Others argue they provided emotional release as potent as any tincture. Still others suggest we may never truly understand what the people of the past believed, only that it meant enough to carve in bone. As the brew simmers, the midwife offers you a place by the hearth. You sit, and for the first time in weeks, the fire crackles louder than your thoughts. Now your journey is softening at the edges. The bite of winter on your cheeks fades into fire's quiet warmth. The pulse behind your gums, that once angry messenger, is now just a distant echo, not erased, but understood. Outside, the wind plays through bare branches like a forgotten tune. You hear it vaguely, but don't strain to catch every note. Some things don't ask to be named. They just want to be felt. The midwife dozes in her chair, breath steady, hands folded like worn pages. Your eyes grow heavy, not from fatigue, but from the gentle unraveling of everything you've been carrying. And maybe that's the real end of the story. Not the pain vanishing, not the final cure, but the choice to sit beside it until it no longer feels like an enemy. You close your eyes. Somewhere in your dreams, a monk recites poetry over tea, a crocodile nibbles gently at lavender roots, and St. Apollonia smiles. Not because the pain is gone, but because you listen to it. Now let the silence hold you. Let it hush the clatter of memory. Let it turn your breath into a lullaby that even old teeth might hum along to. Sleep? Now. You wandered far enough.